Dear guests, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to the second part of the forum, so the second part of the day, and we will talk at this part on media. So in the first part, we raised very many burning issues in Estonia, in Europe, throughout the world, and those issues are reflected in the media. And the power of the word, power of media is huge in reflecting situation, in analyzing situation, in being present through images, headlines, analysis, and so on and so forth. And I'm very happy that we have such a distinguished representatives of media here at our panel. And I am very happy to welcome you at this debate and discussion, Bernt Olufsen from Norway.
No.
Sorry, I am so sorry. Bernt Olufsen from Norway, Mika Pettersson from Finland. This is Melbiksis from Latvia, Anvar Samost from Estonia, and our moderator will be Urve Eslas from our daily Postimees. Please, Urve, go ahead.
Thank you, Mal. So let's start with our second panel today. The topic of media responsibility is extremely wide and complex, so let's get straight to it. Bernt, let us start with you. Not because you're my former employer, but because the importance of the topic I want to discuss with you right now. You have been journalist for 40 years, and we're all journalists here, actually, on this stage. And we should know very well what is the role of media in liberal democracy. Amongst other things, that means to provide our readers accurate coverage on what's going on, including far-right movements, immigrants, etc. But let me give you the example. When I read from media headlines which say the flow of immigrants, for example, it is quite hard to not to think of it as a natural disaster. So we cover the news. Our main tool is language. That's basically all we have. But if there is so much hatred in society, so maybe there is something wrong with the language we use. That is something that reminds me that Johnson and Lakoff described in their book, Metaphors We Live By. If we don't control the metaphors we use, metaphor just will take over and change the way we think about things. And that's how the immigrants, for example, became a natural disaster. So what are your thoughts about this topic?
I think it's important to be aware of that we in the media can really fuel hatred and racism if we are not careful choosing the right words. This has been a discussion going on for a few years now in international media. I think we have to raise our standards of reporting, of editing, and of monitoring what's going on in the media. We all have ethical codes in our national press organizations stating that we should treat people with respect to defend their integrity regardless of religious belief, ethnic origin, nationality, and so on. But maybe we also should include in our style books something about how we write about refugees, migration, and what kind of language we use. There is a huge mix out there in the media with the words migrant, refugee, asylum seeker. There is a lack of precision in the choosing of those words, obviously. The United Nations Alliance of Civilization has worked with this for a couple of years now, and they have given out or published a dictionary for journalists, what kind of words they should use. And we often see those words you mentioned initially here about we are awaiting an invasion of refugees or migrants. Some politicians, British, are speaking about a swarm of them or a tidal flow. And all those words are imprecise and is really fuel for the hatred of those people.
Does it also apply on pictures, photos we use in media?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we had a huge shift in the opinion 2 weeks ago when many newspapers in Europe, news media in Europe, published those pictures of this 3-year-old boy on the beach of Turkey. Of course, there was a discussion about was it right to publish those pictures, but anyway, those pictures became a turning point, I think. In Britain, the popular newspaper The Sun suddenly changed side and became a news media with focus on the humanitarian side of the problem, not the numbers. The same thing happened in Germany, where Bild-Zeitung took the initiative to have a national campaign for the help of the refugees. Of course, and we have seen that many parts of the history in the northern, the hunger catastrophes in the northern part of Africa in the 80s. We've seen it in the Vietnam War, that picture of this napalm victim that changed the whole opinion of the US. So pictures are important, and that forces media to focus more on human beings than on numbers or statistics.
Bernd, you have definitely the experience to share with us here in Estonia. Because of what happened in Norway in 2011, how did your media cope with that situation, covering that?
Well, there was a slogan in Norway among most people and also politicians and media that we should meet a new threat and fear with more openness and more democracy. That meant that we should not hide away the extreme expressions, but we should strive to meet the extremists in the open fields of the media, to argue against them, and to let them publish their opinions. And I think that is the only way of handling extremism in a society. If you hide it away, it will go to other places, to social media, where the hatred can spread without control.
Thank you. Actually, I was really impressed about what your prime minister said back then. You remember, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Our only answer can be more democracy. So this is really, really great point of view. I found it back then, and I still think so. Thank you. This is a really interesting point you made, and I'm sure I will come back to it later. But now, let's go further. So journalists should use more accurate language. I think we all agree here. But what else can we agree about? Anvar, you have been journalist for 27 years. And you and I both know that media should be balanced. For example, treat all political parties equally. But let's imagine the refugees debate. On the one side, people who stand for human rights. And the other side, far-right populist parties who spread hatred and anger. Now, just hypothetically, should journalists agree to choose a side in this situation and support rather liberal democratic values? Or even more, not to give far-right populist parties an opportunity to spread the non-democratic values?
I don't know even where to start from. Basically, free press can only exist in a free and open society. And I think most journalists, even if not very consciously, but still know this, and they feel this almost every day when they work. Every time when somebody tries to force their agenda or their kind of objectives on the journalists in a free society, there is some kind of backlash, which is instinctive. And by this, actually, I think most of the journalists, they internally or intrinsically, they are in favor of having an open and free society, because otherwise their whole work would be impossible. So this, in some sense, puts journalists always on the side of more liberal attitudes and forces and people. On the other hand, journalists have one main responsibility, and this responsibility is before the readers. People who are opening a newspaper in the morning or opening a computer or picking a phone from their pocket and starting to read the news, they have put faith into this media organization whose news or whose content they are reading. And this is actually a huge faith. They don't know what they are going to find in this newspaper, on this television program, on this web page. And this is the main responsibility that we still should give our readers, our viewers, as comprehensive or as full view of what is happening as possible, without really choosing sides, even if sometimes it feels more right to choose sides. And sometimes journalists, they choose sides, but even in those cases, I very much hope that in free societies, those things happen for very brief periods and at very specific instances. I know there is a very widely quoted example of Russia in 1996. And I think it would be fair to say that Russia, before that moment, had more or less free media, definitely if compared to what they have now. And what happened in 1996 was that there was presidential campaign, and both President incumbent Boris Yeltsin and communist leader Zyuganov were running for president, and it seemed that Yeltsin has no chances at all. And somehow Yeltsin supporters managed to bring whole Russian free press behind Yeltsin. And Yeltsin, not because just that thing, but also because of that, he won. And many people see that this might be one of the points where Russian society started to fall into unfreedom, into non-democratic society. So those choices that basically I'm a journalist, I'm making a right choice for the good cause, they can be very dangerous.
So actually it's protecting the press freedom is basically the same thing as protecting liberal democracy. So there's no difference between those two.
I would agree with that, yeah.
Okay, so we agree that news should be balanced.
Balancing is always very subjective. Again, there is mechanical balancing, and then there is kind of, I'd like to think, then there is kind of actual balancing. Mechanical balancing can be very often seen in also free press and also very often in non-free press, which means that you're writing a news story or whatever story in the language of your choosing, which is clearly not balanced, and then for the sake of this mechanical balancing you add opposing view or something like that. This shouldn't be like this. And then there is another situation where there is some very noisy interest group who always wants to be in every story, even if they don't have anything to do with it. And very often they succeed because they are so noisy and so annoying, and they basically appeal on this balancing, and they get in. And actually, very often through this, the story or the picture gets unbalanced. So it's ultimately the editor who carries the responsibility for this balancing act. And this is true both for this one very specific story and for the whole kind of 40 years that you might work as an editor, as a journalist.
Mikael, you wanted something to add?
No, just wanted to about this balancing act that we're working with is that you have to make a clear difference in that you, as Anvar says, that you try to give a comprehensive picture of the society. But it's not the way that you have to balance in a way that 50% of your content is racist and 50% is non-racist. I mean, that's what we have to be aware that there's a danger in that. There are things in society which voices in society who don't enjoy the same freedom as others. I try as an editor to be very precise on this, that this balancing doesn't go too far. I do not accept in my content any racist tones. Clear as that. And we as journalists, I try to think that we sometimes we are too careful in balancing things. We have to raise our voices when needed.
Anvar, do you want to answer to that?
Yeah, well, I agree with that. This is what I partly meant by this mechanical balancing. A few years ago, when we were not so much speaking about refugees or cultural issues in our societies, we were speaking a lot about, for example, corruption in the politics. And politicians, they know very well how the media works. And very often a journalist finds himself or herself in position when he knows that this politician is lying. Everybody knows that. And this politician knows that as well. But he can still demand that 50% of the story would be his story. And this is, well, the same situation that Mika described of having a story being 50% racist. And this is a difficult situation, and it's very difficult to solve because it's very easy to show this media outlet or this journalist being unbalanced, unfair, biased.
And that always
It
happens.
takes lots of courage to deal with it.
Yes, so all those angry phone calls on the next day, we all remember that. So, Mika, let's talk about facts. Let's talk about facts, half facts, and lies, and also rumors. On one side, journalists or media should make clear distinction between those. Facts, opinions, half-facts, half-truths, lies. But But in that case, how to make distinction between facts and rumors which are, as we often know, based on fear? I will explain just in a minute. For example, let us take the well-known case of global warming debate. And this also, by the way, is kind of step further our previous discussion. It was often presented as an equal argument between scientists who say that global warming was a fact and the scientists who denied it. So instead of writing a story and finding out that, for example, red is red, now we read a story and it says that some say red is red and some say red is, let's say, yellow. So media is kind of leaves it to readers to decide what is true and what is not. We saw this very same thing happening during Russian info war. Facts and non-facts were all mixed up. And journalist Michael Weiss warned us already back then that the strength of Western media, what we're really proud of, can be turned into its weakness. And he said that both ISIS and populist parties are fast learners. So sometimes it kind of this same balanced media turns against its own goals. And what can we do about it?
Sometimes you lose faith. I mean, the day before yesterday, there was a Finnish parliamentarian from the party True Finns, which is a populist party. She said that she doesn't believe in Darwin, that she's a creationist. And I feel totally that I'm lost. I mean, I have no weapon anymore. But the problem is that people who live in these bubbles, we call them in bubbles, are in social media, for example, there are different bubbles. There are opposite sides, opposite bubbles, and trying to influence the content of those bubbles, what they produce, is extremely difficult. But then again, you don't have anything else. You said that the only thing we have is democracy. Yes, and the only thing we have is facts. I collected some examples for this occasion that in this one bubble, this anti-foreigner bubble in Finland, they say that reception centers increase crime. Not true. You have to prove that. You have to give them statistics. Not true. Asylum seekers receive more financial support than Finns. Not true. You have to write and say it's not true. Reception centers are an expense for the city. Not true, because the state provides the money. Nothing to do with the plan. Finland is crawling with illegal asylum seekers. No person is illegal when entering the country. You have to remember that. No one is illegal. People granted asylum are only interested in improving their standard of living. Not true. You have to prove that. And then I state, what's wrong with that? We all try to increase our standard of living. What is wrong with that? But my point is that as a media, we have no other choice but to prove that the false is false, a lie is a lie, and the fact is a fact.
So the fact-checking actually would help to stop the disinformation spreading, right?
I think that fact-checking is a growing industry within media industry, and I think it's for a good reason, because there are too many false and lies that we produce unintentionally daily. So I think it's a very good thing that someone really takes and puts an effort to check all the facts that we print. We know that in our newsrooms there are less and less journalists all the time. We're sacking people because the media industry is suffering, but the unfortunate result of that is that we are not as capable as before taking care of facts.
Yes, I'm coming right to you. Didzis, you have been journalist for 15 years, right?
Something like that, yes.
And you have worked both in Sweden and Latvia.
Yes,
So
correct.
you're probably the best person to to ask about the difference with those two sorts or two phases of media.
Yeah, I think we have been talking now for a while about media responsibility, and I think what differs, I could probably say the Baltics, but to keep to the facts, what I know is, well, Latvia from the Nordic countries is we have press freedom, we have free media, free journalists, but the question remains how independent they are. There is a slight difference, right? I mean, we don't have censorship since we regained our freedom, and that's a fantastic thing. You know, I mean, nobody is telling you what to write. I can assure you, nobody told me ever what to write, and I wouldn't allow that to happen. But independence, so what does it mean for media and journalists? I mean, it's also financial independence. One prominent Latvian journalist said once that if you don't have in your bank account money to survive at least for 2 months, you know, your independence is a bit shaky. You know, you can be influenced, right? And that's for the media also. If a media outlet is not a viable business entity, if it's dependent on, you know, some donors, or, you know, we have some daily newspapers in Latvia which are actually owned and controlled by oligarchs who are pumping in money, you know, so they have to write things that these oligarchs want them to write. They are not financially independent. And independence means also institutional independence. There should be some framework, as you have it in Nordic countries. You have a common, comprehensive code of ethics, right? We don't have it in Latvia. We have 2 journalist organizations, which are a bit rivals. None of them has a majority of journalists as members, and there is no really viable institution which would correct, you know, in cases when a certain journalist breaks the rules, you know what to do, you know how to correct that situation. There are some attempts, but it's not for the whole country, it's not for the whole journalist community, and also for the internal discussions, because I mean we face dilemmas every day. Do we publish this picture or not? It should be discussed. There should be some guidelines how to do that, because often we don't have like ready answers. You have to discuss and debate, and then we, you know, decide on something. In Latvian media, it's still often, oh, there is a picture, let's publish it. We get some clicks, you know. I think there were a couple of really, really interesting points, like, for example, about the fact-checking. The problem, I think, also with the current refugee debate and discussions in Latvia is that there are too many opinions floating around and too little facts. And, like, just one example. One party leader, a party which is represented in the parliament, he just simply claimed, oh, those refugees that we are about to accept within this European system, we know that most probably they will be from Syria and Eritrea. And what he said was, oh, they might bring some diseases with them, like Ebola. It's like, there is no Ebola in Syria and Eritrea. Did somebody check it? No. They published the quote as if, you know, that's a correct information. And this means also it's, one thing is fact-checking. Some Latvian journalists are doing that. Like public service broadcasters' website, they have this project called Lie Detector. Sometimes when they see, okay, this politician, you know, there is something in, you know, things that person says, we have to check it. And then they really check it with the facts, and then they say, oh, is it 100% true? Is it half true? Is it not true at all? But another thing is you know, like when a politician just claims something on a certain subject, like in this case, Ebola, you know, it has to do with the general education of journalists, which means, I mean, if you are reporting on refugee issues, you have to study a little bit. And here we have a really big lack in Latvia. Resources, institutions, and so on. Journalists just get assignment. Oh, now you are about to report on refugee issues, and that's maybe the first time he has heard the word refugee, and he has to do it. And then we get the result: Ebola, Syria, Eritrea. Well, I don't know. I just publish it. You know. So there are deeper structural problems, and also about being impartial and balanced. One problem we have in Latvia, I don't think we are unique, is that the traditional way to deal with any topic, you know, you get a proposal from editor, write about this, and then you just search who is for it and who is against it. Two sides, usually. I mean, the first problem, there are often more than two sides, and
Usually.
yes, and that they, of course, the person sometimes tries to just make their job easier, you know. And there is one idea from a Swedish journalist, Magnus Linton, who has been reporting a lot about Latin America and also about the right extremism in Europe. He said about this impartiality, he said, just forget about it. You can't be 100% impartial. I mean, whenever you decide to make one story, you're not doing 100 other stories. That's, you're already partial. But how to make the story balanced? He said, okay, just find out which are the stakeholders, you know, in this case, and try to give each one of them to provide their best arguments, because this is also that sometimes happens. You know, you might interview, you know, all the stakeholders, and then you can pick the quotes, and you can make one person look really smart and another one really dumb because you pick the quotes. So this is really important to really give the people the chance. You know, even if somebody, let's say, seems racist, okay, let's just try to get something out of them. You know. So that they don't also say, oh, you're trying to silence me. But if you try to at least get something from them, maybe they have something rational in them. Because usually people are not like, oh, I'm racist, I want to say a racist thing. You know, they will say, oh, I care about
they
my...
always say that I'm not racist. But
Yes, exactly.
yes, exactly. But and I think that this is important to also to not stigmatize people. You know, it's very easy to just call somebody racist. Maybe they are, but still, you know, they're human beings, just like us. And you said also that it's important to include everybody in some way, right? Not to just freeze out people. I think this is a little bit problem in Sweden with this party, Swedish Democrats, this kind of right-wing extremist party which is in the parliament, and they are trying to freeze them out. In one way, it's a good strategy. In media, sometimes I would say not really, because they find out other ways. They are on Twitter, they are on Facebook, they find, you know, their own blogs and whatever to just get their message. And then they say, oh, the media are not letting us to speak. They're against the freedom of speech, you know. So yeah, I think we have to be really careful also in this refugee issue to just find out who are the stakeholders, what are their interests, and to get the best arguments out of them, because to get some dumb quotes, it's really easy.
Didzis, you told me yesterday that you very strongly believe in media self-regulation. But it doesn't work always, does it?
In Latvia, most often it doesn't work. That's why I have been propagating for it. I think because I'm old enough, I might look a bit younger, but I'm almost 38, so I still remember the Soviet time, and you know how it was. So I really dislike, personally and ideologically, the idea that the state might regulate the content of media, and maybe we should have a state press ombudsman and something like that. I mean, there have been some discussions like this in Latvia. I strongly dislike it because I think it's dangerous. I think what's important is, okay, press freedom, it sounds very nice, but if we think about the responsibility, that means that we ourselves should be the ones who set the borders, right? And I remember once I was interviewed for the radio about the case in Latvia where one person, well, he was just publishing, quoting a publication which there was no doubt. It was anti-Semitic publication, and he was quoting it and putting it on his website. And there was then a court case against him, and some people were saying, "Oh, but you know, he's just quoting. Why not?" And then there was this radio story about this. So I was interviewed for that one, and I said this: it's really important that we ourselves set the borders, that we regulate the limits of press freedom, because there is no absolute press freedom or freedom of speech. Because if we don't do it, somebody else will do it, and it's going to be worse. I mean, for media, if we don't regulate ourselves, somebody else will do it, most probably the state. And otherwise, in general, I mean, we have a really nice neighboring country which already shows how to regulate things. I don't think we want to see that in practice in our country. But as you said correctly, yes, in Latvia, unfortunately it's not working yet, because the journalists as a community are divided, split, and there are many reasons for that. But I hope sincerely that the situation will improve, because if we look back, the progress that we have made since the beginning of 90s, it's incredible. We should be proud of it, and to build on that and not just say, oh, things are going bad. It's not good enough, and it will be better.
In Finland and in Norway, I think the self-regulation works.
Yes, I think the principle of self-regulation is really a fundament for the freedom of the press and the independency of journalism. I think it's all tied together, so there's no doubt about that.
Yes, and in Latvia,
Hungary has no real press freedom. They have no system of self-regulation.
Yeah, and in Latvia, I can just add, I told you yesterday that Latvia is, I think, the last EU country which still doesn't have a media policy, and now the government is trying to develop it. And I know from the journalists who are also in some working groups and so on that this is the chance that some politicians want to use to, get more regulations in the law and so on. And I think this is the time for journalist community to unite and say, hey, we can deal with our issues ourselves better than the state. And we have examples, right, from the neighbors.
Anvar, does it work in Estonia?
I do think it does. You can say many things about the Estonian Press Council, but in principle, I think it works.
Mika?
Yeah, I was thinking about this concept of press freedom is that I've been thinking. What is disgusting about this discussion in about refugees and immigration is the amount of hate speech, which in Finland is when you have the comment section in after the stories and in Twitter and in Facebook and so on. You would never believe that human beings can raise such voice to another human being. And press freedom, these people, when you tell these people that I will not allow you to publish that opinion on my newspaper, on my website, they say that this is censorship, that you're curbing my press freedom. And this is absolutely, a misperception of a concept. Press freedom means that the publisher has a freedom to use his freedom, right? And the editor-in-chief is the one who does it in practice, and if the publisher or the owner is unhappy with him or her, he gets sacked. But this person does not allow any press freedom to the news agency I run or to a newspaper that someone else runs. And when you start hearing these people promoting hate speech, saying that I am being censored, be aware that he doesn't understand what press freedom is.
And there was another side to this, at least in Latvia, that when these kind of people, let's call them like that, we know who they are, usually some right-wing extremists, when they see that some media is doing a good job for example, depicting refugees, they are asking, who did order this? Who paid you? You know,
Yeah, I
like
know it
in
feels-
Latvia, public service broadcaster has doing really. I mean, considering the lack of resources and so on, has been doing a great job. And there was this one politician who just wrote on Twitter, who ordered all these nice stories about refugees and gays, because they think that public service media is still like state media, as it was in Soviet times. And for me, it's fascinating how people forget so fast the history, you know?
Yes.
A lot of the hate speech is provided by anonymous voices out there in the comments of the news articles, in the social media, in blogs. They are hiding behind pseudonyms, and actually, when you mentioned this, I remember that you have had this big debate in Sweden over the blogger Julia Caesar, who was outed a couple of weeks ago by the Swedish media, giving her real identity. And I think one important task for the media is also to disclose those environments, those people spreading hatred from anonymity. But I think also that the media has to focus more on giving relevant information. I think the shift we have been seeing now for the last couple of weeks in Europe, at least in the western part of Europe, has been initiated also with providing more facts and information to the public. And I think the states has a very high responsibility to make it easier for journalists to acquire those kind of facts. There's quite difficult today to have the correct numbers and statistics and the oversight over what's going on in this field. So I think governments should provide journalists with easier tools to get the correct information. That's one of the important also conclusions from the work within UN on this subject.
Concerning those comments and hate speech, I heard yesterday pretty clever comparison between old times journalism and nowadays social media. So back in old times, we newspapers got letters from readers, right? And we could decide which one to publish and which one not. But anybody can comment online now, and problem is that you only take to push a button, and it's published. So, and of course, as you said, comments often turn to hate speech, and it's spreading. So, should that be media responsibility to limit these comments, to limit hate speech? Anvar?
Well, I think it's quite obvious that by publishing those comments, media is taking the whole responsibility for the content of those comments.
We have this recent
comparison with old times when you had readers' letters is very good, and also you can compare it with how the newspapers or other media is publishing advertising. Newspapers are not publishing everything that is brought to them, even if it's advertising content. They still kind of keep this right to choose what kind of advertising they are publishing and what kind of advertising they are not. Although in this area you can say that this is not our responsibility, this is the paid kind of area here. But very strangely, by publishing those anonymous comments, newspapers and portals and media is very much willing to take this whole responsibility to themselves. And I think this is first wrong kind of usage of this responsibility that the editors and media has. And secondly, this is also undermining the press freedom, because this is not why this kind of diminishes the possibility to appeal to those press freedom principles that we have in free society. So I don't know for how long the media is going to carry this burden, but I don't think it will last forever.
I think as an editor, you have to be aware that you have to report to two different systems. One is the legal system, the laws making you responsible for spreading racist expression, at least in my country, that is forbidden. And the other thing is the ethical codes you have to comply with, and the system of self-regulation. And I think you have to ensure that you have a solid moderation of this, moderating those comments. And if you are not doing that, you have to be responsible to the system of self-regulation within the media. I think that's what's happening, and that is what's forcing the media to have a control about what they are publishing.
But well, I would like to add here that it is important that we should not speak only about the traditional media when we're speaking about hate speech and anonymous comments or anonymous content. We should also speak about the social media, because not everybody who is using, I don't know, Facebook, for example, is doing it under their own name. And Facebook is somehow, and other social media networks, they are somehow not seen as having responsibility for that. And there are some legal cases that are actually supporting that kind of opinion. But I do think really that all the social networks are sharing the responsibility for what is said there, because they are now far away from just being an open platform for exchange of views. They are not it, although they don't have their own editorial policies or their own content, but by inviting people to share their views and opinions and thoughts and content, they are kind of on some meta level. They have this kind of editorial policy, which is perhaps not formulated like one, but it's definitely there.
It was so simple in the old days when you had the letters to the editor kind of a thing. You received these letters, and then it was undersigned, one for all, and you knew that if someone is having a bad day, and you know, yeah, I will not print this. And now there's no way you can stop this flood coming in. I mean, I agree with you, gentlemen, that the only way is moderation. I mean, you have to do that. But the world was simple before the social media, and where did this internet come from?
Let me add something.
Do you really want to go back?
No, internet is the most democratic thing that we have.
The task for the media must be, when it comes to social media, to disclose the persons behind the anonymous voices, and to fact check whatever they are claiming.
Yes.
To meet them in the open field, arguing this is the fact.
Yes, but
Yes,
actually,
exactly.
to maybe give a more positive note on all this social media thing. I mean, I'm myself a big fan of social media. I'm very active on Twitter and Facebook, and I think especially for a journalist who is a freelance, you know, it's fantastic. And of course, there are good sides and bad sides. What I think about, for example, Twitter is something along the lines of what British singer Billy Bragg, you know, he's a kind of like activist and so on. He said about that, you know, when he grew up, that's why he picked up a guitar and had to learn a few chords and sing. He said that was the way how to reach the audience. now, and that was punk rock, right? So, and he says, now, today's punk rock, that's Twitter. So I think we should just try to understand that the classical media is like classical music. Twitter is like punk rock. So, you know, each has its own functions. And I think it's a fantastic thing for anybody. If you have an opinion, if you really are burning for some issue, or there is something you have to tell, you just saw something, you take a picture, you put it out. But of course, you have to be responsible. And
Open here. I don't feel very punk yet.
and what I have noticed also in Latvia, what I'm doing myself sometimes, because it's so easy, if I see something is wrong in the media, I put it out on Twitter immediately. And sometimes the media says, hey, this is spreading,
So
you know,
actually
we have
it's
to
a kind
correct.
of, yeah, so it's sort of the self-correction that
That's
you are,
right.
yes.
But of course, with these
Self-regulation, yes.
anonymous accounts, it's also both good and bad, because some people might sometimes need, you know, to be anonymous to report on something that they would be punished for otherwise. But of course, in cases of like hate speech, racism, homophobia, and so on, I think we should just all try to, you know, disclose who these persons are, especially if this is something systematic. Because, you know, some Twitter accounts are kind of like spreading these news, which are not news, it's fake. And that's really dangerous. That's where I think also journalists should step in and try to find out who these people are. This is what happened in Sweden, and this blogger, she was so outraged that when they disclosed her name and surname. But what happened before was that just because two journalists had tried to, each of them, I think once or twice, to approach her for a comment, she didn't want to say anything, and then these two journalists got threats. And just imagine your phone is ringing constantly, and when you pick up, there are always these people who are telling you, we'll kill you, we'll rape you,
yeah.
and so on. It's just so horrible.
Has happened here as well, so yes.
Luckily, and this is, I think, a good part in Latvia. And I'm actually amazed how they haven't figured it out yet. Let's keep the fingers crossed. You know, for all the journalists who report, let's say, on right-wing extremists or refugees, racism, and so on, I know what's happening, for example, in Sweden. A lot of them get death threats. And they have to hide, you know, they have to get these apartments which are hidden. In Latvia, it has never, ever happened. I have got, you know, a few nasty comments on Twitter. I can bear with that. But if somebody will start calling me all day, I don't know.
But let's imagine that actually we could, there would be possibility to publish the real names of haters who threaten us. Would that be a solution?
You mean automatically, or?
No,
How?
probably it needs some work, but if that would be possible.
I think there are two parts. I mean, first of all, I think we should cultivate this culture of openness. I mean, like, I'm open. I never hide my name, surname. You know, why should I do that? I mean, I tweet, I write on Facebook, I blog, I publish articles. I don't hide. If I hide, there must be a very specific reason. You know, maybe I'm leaking information that a big company doesn't want me to leak, and I would get, you know, some really serious repercussions. But that's an exception. I think this should be cultivated. That's an exception. The normal, the common thing is to be open. And then, I don't know, maybe for Twitter and Facebook, maybe there should be some mechanisms when, you know, when you see that somebody is systematically spreading racism or systematically spreading fake news, that maybe there should be some mechanism for them to, you know, receive complaints and then just disclose this identity.
I saw last night that Facebook were going to introduce a dislike button.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Anvar.
Yeah, well, I can imagine that a well-researched story on who are those people who are posting those comments on all those web pages. And that could be interesting, because having had some insight into who they might be, I think
Really?
that there's quite a limited amount of people who are commenting on very many different things, and they seem to have lots of time for that.
Oh, okay.
Or motivation, and I think that
Already got
this
the
is a
hint.
great idea for some newspaper to do this kind of story.
Exactly.
With only one problem that I can see here, that still Estonian newspapers and portals, they are interested in having those anonymous comments, and if they choose to write that kind of story or to show who those people really are, then actually I think that they also should choose to kind of cease those anonymous comments, because you can't have it both ways. Encourage those comments and then put those people out in the open who are writing them.
But there is one more detail in this regard. We are now talking about internet and press, but radio. You know, all these call-in programs.
Yeah.
That's. I think it's a good integral part for a good radio station. But then again, you have to have a really good moderator and who can decide, okay, now we have to cut off because, you know, this is getting too racist. Or, you know, when somebody is really saying things that are completely contradicting the facts, that the moderator is well prepared and can, you know, comment and in a nice way so that nobody really gets too angry. This is really difficult, but this can be done, I think.
It's really interesting, but time is running fast, and I have one more question for everybody before we open up for questions. So actually, and this is actually the main question. Since the situation, as we see in Europe nowadays, is complex and fragile, so do we need in Europe some kind of common agreement amongst media workers that would help to solve that kind of problems, like language we use, making clear distinction between facts and lies, solving this social media comments and online comments question? Do you think that would actually help?
We have that.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
You have that, but I mean, like everywhere in Europe, like common.
We have several networks working on these issues. Really, I'm on the advisory board of something called the Ethical Journalism Network, which is a European network of journalists and editors working on issues against hate speech, for freedom of expression, for self-regulation, and so this is a discussion going on, and the Ethical Journalism Network and the Global Editors Network, who's also on the same issues, they cooperate with several United Nations UNESCO programs discussing these problems. So I think this debate is going on, but I think one of the main points could be to include or to strengthen the regulation in ethical codes regarding the respect for personal integrity, religion, ethnic origin, and so on. That could be included in many more countries' codes of journalistic ethics.
Yes.
I have actually an idea, which I think it's, at least from Latvian perspective, it's not yet there, it's not materialized, and it's actually creating problems in Latvia. In Latvia, a lot of foreign news are made by, quoting different foreign newspapers. And that's okay, but there is a certain lack of, I would call it media literacy about different countries, which newspaper is what, which media is what, because I have noticed since I spent 6 years in Sweden, so I know the media landscape. And I see quite often news made up by quoting, and they just write, "Oh, it's a newspaper, this and that." And I see, hey, that's not like a normal newspaper. That's a racist bulletin, It's just because they don't know. So I think if we want to have something pan-European, this would be a good project to exchange information in a coherent way, maybe some databases, I don't know, lists of which media is which newspaper. For example, in Sweden, it's really important to know what is the editorial line. Is it social democratic newspaper or right-wing newspaper? Because they report in a slightly different way. It's normal, but if you don't know that, if you don't pay attention, then you make up stories about Sweden which are not completely true. So here I think there is a gap that can be filled and should be filled.
Yes.
There was one point that I have in mind is there was talk about on a previous session about Hungary, and then I just have to remind you that one of the first things that the Hungarian government did was that they abolished the independent news agency called MTI, which is nowadays a PR organization for the Orban government. So just one twist to the media climate or the popular climate in Hungary is our actions like this. Just to remind you that the politicians, they will do that and they will affect the climate of the press or the freedom of the press unless the press is strong enough financially to oppose or otherwise. Things like that happen in European Union, in Central Europe. I feel sorry for my MTI colleagues. It's all gone.
Anvar.
The question was about some kind of comprehensive agreement, pan-European agreement.
Yes, but or even more, the common understanding what we actually need to follow the agreement, not only have it.
Yeah, I think it would be very European not to have such an agreement, and I don't think that such an agreement is possible when we are having those values that we have now. But the values are important in the sense that if we are having more or less the same values about freedom of press, then this is in some level the agreement that you were asking for. And as with this Hungary case, which is I think very good case, if there was such an agreement, then Hungary, I'm quite sure, would say that we are following this agreement. We are not doing anything wrong. We are not in breach of this agreement. But everybody who has some kind of understanding what freedom of press means, they can see that actually they are trying to strangle it.
Yes, as I said in the beginning, it's a very complex question, and I have to say it again now, I'm afraid. But now we have about 23 minutes for questions. So, wow. Let's start from there.
Let me start that I never got the answer to my question in the previous session about how to measure capacity of the society to integrate refugees and migrants, and how to increase this capacity. My own answer to this question is that one way is media and journalists can increase the capacity of society to integrate refugees. But I don't want to continue in this with this question. My question is for panelists that at least 2 or even 3 mentioned that we have in a society far-right populist parties, and my question is why journalists have never mentioned that there is also far left populist parties in this related questions, migrants and whatever, other questions. And why this is that journalists, they want to criticize only far right? Why for journalists far right is much worse than far left?
Thank you. Let's take a few more questions there. Yes.
Yes, I wanted to ask about this very worrying trend that is happening, at least in my opinion, in Estonia. And Stephen Colbert, a very famous political entertainer, has coined the term truthiness, which explains how political actors, but also media actors, not anymore try to find facts that support their claims, but they're trying to change and modify the facts and claim that their ideas are true and everyone else is wrong. And this has been happening in Estonia more and more, at least the way I see it. For example, claiming that police, does something about refugees, but doesn't do something about the supposed group rape, or the government is actually collaborating with the EU, and it's all, this big paranoid idea. These all ideas used to exist in society, but I think they are gaining mainstream attention. And although media is not fully responsible for it, and that's completely fine, however, media is seen as the mediator of truth. And I was wondering whether, what can media do, or especially if we think about mainstream media rather than very alternative media, do so that at least we try to stick with the facts, or that we try to establish that even though we don't know the absolute truth, there must be some truth. So what is the responsibility, and what should you guys do, basically?
Actually, it's a very good question. So if we can't prove the truth, can we prove that something is not true? So what do you think?
Yes, we can. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So I was just thinking the cases that we have in Finland. We have these rumors and things like in a small local newspaper. There's a story said it's a fact that the one that raped my neighbor's daughter was from Somalia. Well, you have to be very careful in that, because they're rumors. They come from social media, and then you check the fact, and then it's not true. It was a white male of Finnish origin, the rapist. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You have to check facts. And I want to very shortly answer your question. I don't understand your question. I just don't understand. We criticize in Finland far left, far right, far center, whatever. Far center. We criticize everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know Estonian situation.
No, neither do I, but I think we have had a lot of attention towards the left extremism in the world also over the years. But the situation is maybe that when it comes to migration, the right extremists are the louder speaking part of everything. So that's why they also that's also reflected in the media, I think. When it comes to the other question, I think media should also be honest in their reporting. Media should not disclose, should not hide away problems of integration. There has been a lot of debate over these issues also, especially when it comes to dramatic events. A couple of months ago, we had this murders on the IKEA plant in Sweden. We have had a series of series of rapes in the city of Oslo over the years, and that has been the crimes committed of especially African asylum seekers. So it's been a huge debate. Should media avoid pointing out those problems, hide them away, or should we report about them in a fair way?
So what's your answer?
I choose the last version of it, because if we don't report on the problems of integration, there will be no solving of the problems.
Yeah, I can try to answer to both questions. And first of all, to connect to what you just said, how to report on this, and then, for example, about these rapes and crimes and so on. I have a very good Norwegian friend who shared statistics with me on different nationalities in Norwegian prisons. And guess which nationality is at the moment number 3 in Norwegian prisons?
Should be some Baltic nationality.
It's
probably.
Lithuanians. You know, I'm not saying that, you know, now we should try to demonize Lithuanians, but this should be shown as, look, I mean, it's not about nationality, it's people in certain conditions do certain crimes, and that's just about it, and crime is wrong. That's about it. And more about this question, I think what you were talking about, it was about conspiracy theories. And I think this as a topic for media, it's a brilliant topic, and at least in Latvia, it's underdeveloped. You know, media should do more analytical articles and materials on different conspiracy theories, different types, how to recognize them, and so on. I think it's a brilliant proposal. Maybe I should do it. And the second one about right-wing and left-wing extremists. The thing is that, like, if you look at the Latvian political system, I'm not so much expert on Estonia, but in Latvia, all the parties which are in the parliament, and that has been for years, they are right-wing. There is no, they're not even social democrats, you know. So, and about extremists, I think first of all we should define where the line goes. You know, if you're radical in your opinions, it doesn't mean you are extremist. Extremist is somebody who is ready. Number one, ready to take up to violence. Number two, that person is usually a fundamentalist, which means he genuinely believes and is not ready for discussion. So that's the extremist which I guess we are talking about. But about refugee issues, it's of course, it's right-wing extremists, and not even just extremists, just right-wing people who are mostly against because of different reasons. That's it.
Anvar.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by those far left parties in Estonia who don't get criticized. Can you please mention a few names? Then I'd be in position to answer your question.
Not really, no. So,
Last 2 weeks opinion articles in the Postimees.
But which party?
No, I cannot remember the names but opinion, this stigmatization of right wing is so widely used in Estonia, and not only extreme right, but also Euroscepticism and so on. This is, I think that very many people are under such a pressure, and even press is very hardly accept them to publish these people.
okay, we have more questions there.
Just to go back to the beginning of the discussion, there was a mentioning of the UN making up the toolkit or a dictionary about the refugee problems. There is actually such a thing in Estonian. Already from 2012, it was made by me, okay, mostly. Of course, I'm promoting myself. But it was a Union of Journalists and the International Organization of Migration co-working. So we have such a thing. Why the journalists don't use it?
Exactly, and that was my question, by the way.
I have no idea. I guess it's 2 things. It's called in Estonia, Estonian juhendmaterjal, which is I don't know how to actually explain it, which was very unfortunate choice of words. Maybe it should have been a help material or something like that. They would use it easier. Another thing was we made it Union of Journalists, which is not so very popular, but okay. The second comment is about the problem of the pan-European agreement on how to do or how to cover things. Well, there is such a thing, as it's been mentioned. There is actually a global one, International Federation of Journalists has a code of ethics. The problem is, of course, how to enforce these things. But finally, I'm getting to the question part, which is, I've been listening to the examples of being brought out here as well about the press freedom and the demands of the press freedom being followed by some extreme sites. But isn't it the problem that people, and here as well, I think the Mr. Melbix did actually use it as a synonym, the press freedom and the freedom of speech. It's not the same thing. People tend to misinterpret press freedom as freedom of speech. So how is your view is there actually the necessity of explaining these differences, and that the press freedom is not about freedom at all, it's actually about limitation?
Yeah, I was just I tried to cover that issue, saying that freedom of speech means that you or I can go outside there and yell. Whatever opinion we have, no one can censor that opinion, right? And as I tried to tell, freedom of press means that the publisher and the editor-in-chief for he's put in there to promote freedom of speech. There's a difference, you're quite right in that. But with the wording, I was thinking when we were talking about the wording, because we had a discussion last week about the refugee quotas within our newsroom, that shall we use the word when we are dealing with the quotas? Shall we talk about that it's that we are sharing burden or we are sharing responsibility? Those small words, the differences, can make a world to your reader, what words you use. And you can we decided that it's a responsibility, that we share responsibility within the European Union, not burden. It's all about these flows and so on and so on. But this burden and responsibility, think about that. Daily you read word burden, contra you read responsibility.
It's a part of how we use metaphors and how they influence us.
So, if I can just shortly reply, of course, I didn't mean that freedom of press and freedom of speech are synonyms. I mean, they are interconnected, of course. And just one peculiar detail from Latvia, sometimes when discussing media ethics issues and with journalists, and when you point out, well, you know, this was maybe not the right way to report on this, or this terminology used, like illegal migrant, was not really appropriate, and then some journalists start referring to, hey, but this is my freedom of speech. Are you trying to restrict me? You understand what I mean? And there I agree with you. Press freedom means that, you know, there are borders which we shouldn't cross. But I think it's important that journalists themselves decide on that. And freedom of speech, of course, there are also borders, but that's, you know, if somebody thinks this is hate speech or racism, then you can go to court and it should be dealt with. Of course, it's never absolute freedom. Not for journalists, not for private individuals. We should understand that.
We had several more questions here. One is here? Yes.
Only, I think Didris has mentioned the issue of money. The journalists don't just write or speak or show pictures because they want to report on important issues. They also do it because the owner of the paper wants to make money. And just a recent example from Postimees, 10 days ago we had the first tolerance demonstration, and in the gallery of the demonstration in Postimees Online, the first picture of the gallery was of Kristiina Ojuland, who was there to demonstrate against tolerance. But she, of course, had been a very skillful person manipulating actually with the media, because she appeared there with a big red hat. She has been in the Estonian media in the yellow section since several decades, and snap, the fish caught the angle. And another issue is that bad news always seems to sell better. It's so easy to. I work as a fixer for different international TV companies. It's so easy to sell a story that tells about some racist events, like the motorcyclists going to the refugee village. And guess what? Did anybody care to report about 7,000 people getting together at Freedom Square and demonstrating for pro-tolerance? Nobody really cared about that. So
we had a leader, by the way. Postimees had a leader.
Of course, but for international press, this was just a non-topic. And I think by choosing what we report on, we also set the agenda. If we report on bad things, racist things, hate things, this kind of seems like the norm. And if we neglect good things, then it sets the agenda.
Okay, very good question, but we're running out of time, so let's take a few more questions and then, yes, there.
My name is Oleg Samorodny, freelancer here in Estonia. The war in Ukraine and the situation in the Baltic countries show very clear that Russian TV channels, Russia Today and others, are the instruments of propaganda, the instruments of the aggressive foreign policy of Russia. In your opinions, is the negative influence of Russian information war against Europe is dangerous or not? And if dangerous, how democratic states of European Union must destroy this influence?
So let's take the third one as well, I think, because we really have only 5 minutes left. No? Yes.
Member of Parliament, the headline of this panel, there is the word combination democratic liberalism. I must say I don't understand the possible meanings of this expression, but let me put a question like this. You are experts at least of 5 Northern European countries and cultures and their journalism. Do you see just now that there is something on the rise that is bad or unwanted, whatever we name it, in the journalism of these countries? So is the headline, does it carry something real? Does it express some real threat that we must be know and concerned and take something to avoid it?
So here we are. Here we go. Yes.
I can take two of the last questions. One about Russian propaganda warfare. Yes, we should be doing something, but we have to understand the enormous financial resources that Russia has, and it's like to counteract that will be really, really tough. And then again, of course, journalists are not supposed to be doing counter-propaganda. We should just be doing our job. I think in Latvian context, there have been discussions of developing more like public service Russian TV stations and so on. I think it should be done, and I think these discussions are being too, long without any action. And instead, the government now, for example, discussing the budget, they cut down the financing for the public service for the next year, which is, I think, when they simultaneously are saying, oh, it's information warfare going on, this is, I think, outrageous. It should be criticized every day until they correct it. And the second one, the big problems, I think financing. It's for every media in each country, because things are changing so rapidly, right? With the internet, with the less ads in text and so on, and we still don't know how to develop a good model for a viable business, and it's a problem for each country, each media. and maybe we should somehow work together, but there are no ready solutions. So that's a big problem. Money, just as you said, money is a big problem.
Andres was first. Then.
Yeah, I have answered the question why the negative events get more coverage than positive ones hundreds of times, but it is my pleasure to answer this again. My background is in business journalism, and I have also answered. I bring this example for you to perhaps understand why it is so. Also, as a business journalist, I've been asked at least tens of times, if not more, why are you always reporting if something goes wrong with some bank, but you never report when banks are doing well? Probably this answers the question.
I have a different example, but we know because this question is being asked. You know, normal is that trains run.
Yeah.
You don't publish every day that the train is running again on schedule. News is when it's not running on schedule. That's unfortunately the definition of news.
Focusing on problems is what brings society go forward, I think. But of course, we should improve a little bit, also reflecting the positive sides of migration. At least in my country, there has been some good examples on reporting on communities who would not survive without immigrants helping out, keeping the wheels going. So there are also success stories in this respect.
So now we're really out of time. And one thing we journalists really, really well know is that deadline is sacred. So, and that was our deadline here. So I thank the panelists, I thank the audience, and now I will give it back to Mal.
Thank you so much again, all the panelists of our second part of the day and the first part, of course. And we hope at the Open Estonia Foundation that those conversations, which we, I wouldn't say started, but we had today, will continue in our society and elsewhere, that our policymakers will be inspired by those ideas, proposals, what to do in order to design better policies and strategies regarding our current situation with refugees, future of Europe. And I hope that, if not before, we will meet again next year. But the topic of the forum will be absolutely different. But we do not know yet what will be the topic then. But so long, and if not before, then meet you next year. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for active participation, good questions, and good debate and conversation. Let's continue our conversations at the lobby with food and snacks and wine. Thank you again. Thank you for coming. Meet you.